Hello and welcome to part 2 of searching for Duck Reach. In the last video I talked about riding to find the Duck Reach power station, which I did, and I included the link for the video I made of that, and now I've found it and I'm on my way home. So I'm not going to talk you through the journey home. I actually know where I'm going this time, so it's not going to be quite as driving around aimlessly in circles, but instead I'm going to talk about other things and just give my thoughts on some other things that I've been giving some thought to. I welcome your comments and your feedback if you feel so inclined, and when I become aware of those I will certainly reply to them. In the world of motorcycling, there are essentially two camps of motorcyclists. There are those who are fans of American iron, that is Harley Davidsons and Indians motorcycles, ones that are still measured in imperial measure, in other words 105 or 108 cubic inches or something like that. Then there are the fans of the Japanese manufacturers, who are or sometimes referred to derisively as metric bikes. By that I mean that the size is given in cc's, like 650, 700, 1700 or whatever it is. The riders of American bikes generally seem to feel that their bikes are superior to any other bike or brand, and in some circles riders of American iron have a derisive comment that says no Jap crap on their rides or in their clubs or anything like that. I should mention at this point also that there is a third group, a much smaller group I think, that are fans of European bikes, in particular BMW and Ducati. The Japanese manufacturers, that is Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki and Kawasaki, they each have their fans as well. In other words, there are some people who just love Hondas and would only ride a Honda and wouldn't ride a Suzuki if you paid them and so forth. But I think that the general agreement among those people is that the Japanese bikes are pretty good quality, represent mostly value for money, well made, and are comfortable to ride. Now, I'm not suggesting the American bikes aren't. I haven't ever ridden one, so, well, that's not entirely true. I did ride a Harley Davidson once, but I haven't ridden them or owned one, so I can't make a lot of comment on. But I can say that by comparison, the American bikes are extraordinarily more expensive than similar Japanese bikes. To give you a sense of comparison, I once owned a Kawasaki Vulcan Voyager 1700, which is based on a Harley Davidson. I'm not sure which one, but it's based on a Harley Davidson. The Kawasaki was $23,000 brand new right away. The Harley Davidson it's based on, I think, was something like $48,000. There was no way that I could justify spending that amount of money if I had it. But having said that, much as I loved the Goldwing and I wanted one, a Goldwing cost almost as much as a car, a Toyota Camry, and there's no way I could justify spending $36,000 on a Goldwing either, so I didn't. What I'm saying here is that there are people who are fans of various bikes, and I suspect that when Japanese bikes first appeared on the Australian market in the period after World War II in the late 60s, they weren't very good. Remember that Japan was rebuilding its economy after World War II and rebuilding its manufacturing and so on, and I suspect that some of their bikes weren't very good and people didn't want to buy them. But over time the Japanese got better at making bikes, and in the late 50s and early 60s it was the British bikes, the BSA, the Triumph, the Royal Enfield and so on, that were considered to be the bike. BSA no longer exists. Triumph are now made in America, and Royal Enfield is made by a company in India. There was a time when the film The Wild One with Marlon Brando and Lee Marvin came out, that there was a moral panic in society about the corrupting influence of motorcycles and motorcyclists on the social fabric of society, and the New South Wales Police did everything in their power to try and force motorcyclists off the road by constantly harassing them and pursuing them and fining people for things and so on. Fortunately, that didn't succeed, and most people began to realise that most motorcyclists aren't like Marlon Brando and Lee Marvin. They're just people who like riding motorcycles, and yes, they wear leathers, and they wear leathers because of protection from the road and so on. In the same way as most people aren't like Jack Nicholson and Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda in Easy Rider. So the point I'm making here is that there are people who are welded or wedded to a particular brand or a particular type of motorcycle, and sometimes that connection is based on fact and quality, and other times it's based on the heart rather than the head. Now, I'm sort of bringing this up because I've read a lot of comment lately about the quality or lack of quality or alleged lack of quality in Chinese-made cars. And let me say from the beginning here, I don't own a Chinese-made car. I don't work for a Chinese motor vehicle company in any way. I'm not trying to sell you a Chinese-made car. I'm just making some comments and thinking out loud about this and putting what I consider to be an alternative point of view. Now, when I say Chinese-made cars, let's remember that Tesla and Kia both make cars in China. They are, American and Korean brands, but they both have factories and make cars in China. Then there are the Chinese companies such as SAIC, which make LDV and other cars, GWM that make Aura and the Great Wall Utes, and BYD. There's MG in there somewhere and so on. So there's a bunch of Chinese manufacturers, and it's alleged that they are able to produce the cars that they do at the price they do because of subsidies they receive from the Chinese government. Now, I haven't been to China, I don't think about the Chinese economy, so that may or may not be true, but I want you to consider the fact that at a time, and for a very, very long time, the Australian government of both persuasions poured money into Holden, Ford and Toyota to encourage them to continue to make cars in Australia, even well past the point where Australians had stopped buying Holdens and Fords, and the only car that was being bought here in any significant numbers that was being made in Australia was the Toyota Camry, and that was being bought for export rather than for domestic consumption, especially the hybrid, which was very popular in other markets as a taxi. When the Australian government decided to withdraw those subsidies, Toyota, Ford and Holden all closed up shop and left. Remember at a time that there were Australian manufacturers, Holden, Ford and Valiant, and whilst they were all offshoots of American companies, we bought them because they were Australian cars, or we thought they were. At the time when the Japanese cars came onto the market, people wouldn't buy them because they thought they were poor quality, and they were, and we preferred to buy an Australian car. Over time, the Japanese learned to make better cars and just made better cars, and we bought them in big numbers, and we stopped buying Australian cars. Following on from that, the Korean manufacturers came into the Australian market, and when their cars first came into the Australian market, they weren't very good either, and people didn't want to buy them. But in particular, if you think about early Hyundais and Daewoo, which are no longer sold in Australia, they weren't very good cars, but people who could not afford a Japanese car were buying a Korean car, and the Koreans were, I guess, happy to be putting people in cars and selling some cars, but again, over time, they just learned how to make better cars. And now, for those who follow the car market in any way, you'll know that the 4 top-selling brands in Australia are, in this order, Toyota, Mazda, and then Kia and Hyundai, I think, are just about equal. Sometimes one year it's Kia, next year it's Hyundai, and the following year those two are reversed. But those are the 4 top-selling brands in Australia. Now, as I say, there's been a lot of comment from people who've been looking at reviews on YouTube and in the papers about the quality of Chinese cars. As I also said, I don't own a Chinese car, and my knowledge of them is based on the reviews that I've read, the reviews that I've seen people, videos that I've seen people make about them, and these people are people who are paid to make videos and review cars. That's their job. They know what to do and they know what to comment on about a particular car. And I suspect that for the most part they're reasonably honest and truthful in their assessment. I guess one of the things they have to consider is if they are too harsh in their criticism of a particular vehicle, then that manufacturer may not offer them a press car for a review next time, so maybe they pull a few punches. I don't know. I don't want to suggest that they are deliberately dishonest, but maybe sometimes they don't go as hard on the faults about a vehicle as maybe they ought. But I'm not trying to impugn anyone's reputation or suggest anyone is acting in a dishonest way. But For the most part, the reviews that I've seen of Chinese cars, and that is the Haval in its various incantations, the Aura, the BYD Atto 3, and the Seal, and the Dolphin, the MG in its petrol versions, its plug-in hybrid versions, and electric version, generally the reviews are fairly favourable. When I say they're fairly favourable, I mean that the reviewer talks, I think, with a fair degree of honesty about the good points about the car, and when there are negative points, they point them out. Now, it's true that we're not going to know about the depreciation value of some of these cars for 3 or 4 years because they've just come onto the market. We won't know until people decide to turn them over in 3 or 4 years how much they've depreciated, but going by the general market, we can say they'll probably depreciate somewhere between 48 and 52%, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. The electric cars may be a little bit more because people are concerned about battery degradation and various other issues which may or may not be things that they ought to be concerned about, but are. For the most part, the people who review these cars are of the opinion that they're generally pretty well put together for the money that you're paying. And when I say that, I mean, for example, the MG Excite, I think it's called, the Excite 51, which is being marketed as an electric Toyota Corolla, and it's about 38 grand drive away, which is about the price of a Toyota Corolla. They're saying, well, for 38 grand, this is what you're getting. If you're buying a $20,000 car, doesn't matter who makes it, you're going to get a $20,000 car. There aren't very many of those around, but if you're buying a car that's in the, say, $20,000 to $25,000 price range, you're going to get what you paid for. Because the manufacturer, in order to make that car for that price, has to make certain decisions about what I'm going to put in and what I'm going to leave out. And if you're doing your research before you buy the car, you know that that's what's going to happen. But in the case, as I say, of the MG Excite, it's about $38,000 and being marketed or being promoted by the reviewers as an electric Toyota Corolla. They're generally of the view that it's pretty well put together. The materials are, for the most part, pretty good quality. The seats are comfortable, the controls are all well ergonomically placed and so forth. The big issue they often have with those cars is the infotainment screens, which they say are either slow or laggy. Sometimes they just don't work at all. And some of the features that people tend to expect in their cars, like Apple CarPlay and Android, whatever it's called, are not available, but it will be available as an over-the-air update at some later date and so on. Some do have built-in sat-nav and some don't. But by and large, most people say that, most reviewers say those cars are pretty good cars. Now there is a point here where when you're looking at a car that's made by a Chinese manufacturer, when you could say reasonably, well, I don't want to support a company in a country that does some of the things that the Chinese government is alleged to do. Now I'm saying alleged because I haven't been to China and I don't know whether they do these things or they don't. I'm not saying they don't. I'm not saying they do. I'm saying I don't know. It certainly appears questionable that some of their behaviour in regard to human rights of religious and ethnic minorities and some of their attempts to interfere in the affairs of other countries through cyber attacks and so on are certainly questionable. There's no doubt about that. And you might reasonably say, well, I don't want to support a company in a country that does those kind of things. And that's a fairly valid point. But I would say to you, well, if that's your point of view, then give back your air conditioner, give back your fridge, give back all the TVs you have in your house, give back the washer and the dryer, hand over the tablet you use, hand over the smartphone you use, hand over the smartwatch you wear, and a fair big bunch of the clothing you wear, because all of those things are made in China. Now, you might say, well, I use an iPad. Well, an iPad might be designed in California, but it's actually assembled in China. So, you know, you can tell yourself, well, I use this or that product that's made by this or that company, but the fact is most of it's assembled in China. And so, yes, it's fair to say that some things that happen in China are questionable, but that's a separate issue from saying, well, is the car that they make any good, and is my criticism and evaluation of that car based on sound analysis of the car and looking at it dispassionately and saying, these are the good things about it, these are the bad things about it, this is what works well, this is what doesn't work well, or is it just a case of saying, well, I don't like Chinese stuff, and I don't want to buy a Chinese car, and I'm not going to. That's your right to say that, and it's your right to comment that way. But all I'm saying is let's make our comments fair and accurate and based on dispassionate assessment of the product rather than personal bias that may or may not have a basis in reality. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, I hope you've enjoyed, and I will talk to you again shortly.